very few people in the world actually understand the benefits of exercise, because their idea of exercise is getting up from the breakfast table, going to their car, driving to work, sitting at a computer, walking to the lunchroom, eating junk, going back to their computer, walking to their car, going home, and then medicating themselves for a life with no meaning and being in a factory existence. And so they have to use sugar, drugs, alcohol to escape the reality that they've bought into, because they haven't taken responsibility for creating the life that they want, which is why in my system, being clear on what your dream is number one. Because if you don't have that compass bearing, you're very susceptible to manipulation by anybody.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Our guest today is a world-renowned expert with 39 years of experience in the field of corrective and high-performance exercise, kinesiology, stress management, and holistic wellness. He's the founder of the CHEK Institute, where they run 4 advanced certification programs and provide numerous training videos and courses to students worldwide. In partnership with his expertise, he is the author and co-author of 11 books and the host of the popular podcast Living 4D. He's also an international presenter and consultant for organizations such as the Chicago Bulls and the US Air Force Academy. Today, we cover a lot of ground, including why biohacking is one of the biggest scams in the fitness industry, everything you need to know about psychedelics helping you find your purpose, and why he thinks the fitness industry isn't as progressive as they need to be. So please welcome back the founder of the CHEK Institute, Mr. Paul CHEK. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for inviting me to your new, it's kind of a bit of a, what do you call it? It's kind of a huge estate now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I don't know. I think it's classically called an estate. It's the name of it is the Rainbow Hills, but it's 14 acres. So yeah, there's
a ranch or something like that.
It's like it's sometimes called a ranch. Yeah. So we've, as you know, we've got animals and gardens and building a greenhouse, and it's a little of everything. There's space to exercise and breathe and move and keep the kids happy and raise animals and farm.
Yeah.
So we're building it so it's fully self-sustainable, so the world can get as crazy as it wants, and we'll have everything we need here.
Yeah. So, have you got a bunker?
No, I'm not. If it gets to the point where you need a bunker, we're all done anyhow. So
yeah,
I don't think I'll go that far, but I'm just happy to have the environment to raise my kids and to keep them connected to the earth and teach them important things like how to farm and grow food and be practical and be kids, be healthy kids, get dirty.
Yeah, it's missing a lot nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah.
How much is this sort of what you've created here? Has this been something that you've been working on and constructing and imagining for a lot of your career, or is how? Because I know you're obviously very spiritual, and listening to some of your videos over the last few days aligned with your purpose, but is this sort of a manifestation of what you've been working on for a long time?
Yeah, I was raised on a big farm. We had a 142-acre farm when I was a kid, so I've come from an environment where we were fully self-sustainable. We pretty much lived off of our own farm, our own milk, our own meat, our own plants. We hardly had to get anything from the store, So I grew up understanding those principles. I think what happened was, one, when the kids came, I knew it was important to put them somewhere. We wanted to get them away from 5G, so we wanted to get out of the towns. There's no 5G here.
I noticed that when I was trying to find the place.
Yeah, once our Vista home was really lovely. We had a beautiful 3/4 of an acre, trees, gardens. But once they put 5G in there, I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was in a electric cage all the time, and it was just very stressful because I'm very sensitive to subtle energies, and I didn't want my kids being drowned in that. So we wanted to consolidate, because I had my home in Vista, then you've been to my Heaven House, which was my office, and Angie's home at that time was in Riverside, and she had a beautiful big home with a gym in the garage where she trained people, and she had a whole big nutrition store and business there. So I wanted to bring everything to one place where we could teach our workshops, kind of do the things we have to do to run the Institute, have food, have water, have space, have a gym, have a classroom, swimming pool, cold plunge, sauna, so that we could actually really live the healthiest possible lifestyle we could without having to travel and burn up so much time and energy just going back and forth from locations. And we wanted to, my rule, it took us 5 years to find the place, but my rule was I won't move or buy any place that's not as nice as the Heaven House or better. Because I loved the Heaven House, and my guests, my clients and patients come there and they would just love it. They didn't even want to leave, it was just like, because you saw it was a really beautiful place. So my rule was we got to find a place that nice or better so that when people come here, it's a really enjoyable experience. And so people love coming here for my workshops, and they just love the energy, the environment, and we cook food for them. And you met our chef, so we do all organic food for everybody. And it was just our dream to centralize everything and to create the environment that we'd love to be in, so that whether we were working or not working, we were really in a beautiful place and enjoying ourselves, and setting it up so that it's sustainable enough that no matter what happens in the world, we'll be safe. We'll have our core needs met. So we've been putting a huge amount of time, energy, and money into. We're building a big greenhouse right now, and we've done too many things to list, from getting our own water and drilling a well and building gardens and clearing land, and it's a long, expensive process. Getting solar in, so it's a work in progress. But we've been here for 2 years now, and we've come a long way. We had to fix up a lot of the stuff here because the systems were quite run down, but we got a good deal on the place, and we really couldn't ask for a better place. I mean, you can see the views are incredible here. We're on top of a mountain, so you can see in every direction. It's just gorgeous, So it's kind of our dream home, really. We all had reached a point in our life where we said, let's create what we really want for the rest of our lives. And so after 5 years of shopping, and we finally found a place. Everything we found that would suit our needs was so far out of town, there was no internet. And we run our business worldwide on the internet. So this was the first place that we found that had everything we needed and had decent enough internet speed that we could actually function as a business. And it was the most beautiful of all of them. So it was a little more expensive, and we had to stretch a bit, but it's worth it.
When I was preparing for this, I was thinking back when I first met you, and I think it was at some sort of convention in England somewhere, and at the time, the gym ball, fit ball, stability ball, whatever you call it, was popular, and I remember going to do one of your sessions, and I was thinking back, the Paul CHEK then, which was probably 20 plus years ago, how have you changed as a person in I suppose, sort of personally and professionally, in terms of your outlook on your own life, and then also your outlook from a professional perspective in the sort of space that you're in?
I don't think I've changed at all. I've grown a lot because I've had to deal with more life, and I've been working as a therapist and life coach for countless numbers of people. So whenever you work with people's challenges, they become your own, and you're in a relationship. So I've never been of the mindset that I'm telling people what to do and it's a dictatorial relationship. It's like I'm entering into a relationship with them where I use my skills as a therapist or a coach to help grow them, but inevitably I have to grow myself in many ways. They could be somebody that's very hard to get along with. Maybe they have an addiction and they're constantly selling themselves on their addiction, and I'm sitting there trying to help them see something rational and get them clear. So, I have to grow to match my clients and meet them where they're at. And it can take you into some very interesting and often challenging places because you have to confront things that you didn't ever realize you were going to have to confront. but philosophically speaking, the foundation of my teachings, I mean, spirituality was part of my childhood, meditation. I was having out-of-body experience as a child. I'm a remote viewer. I have been for most of my life. I studied with the monks. I've been practicing meditation. I studied with Master Fong Ha, did Tai Chi every day for 18 years, studied medical Qigong, practiced that. The zone exercises in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, which I think I published it in 2004, but I started writing it in 2000. And by then I'd already really had a fairly high level of mastery of Tai Chi and Qigong. So the zone exercises are my synthesis of what I've learned working mostly with Master Fong Ha and then another lady named Regina Gill who taught me medical Qigong. So the core foundation of my teachings has always been there. The difference is that over time, my students grew up to being ready to deal with what I couldn't tell them before because they were too caught in this mechanistic mindset. If you can't weigh it or measure it, it doesn't exist. So things like meditation and spiritual development, they saw that as like hippie stuff and foo-foo. But as more and more of my students got deeper into my teachings and more of them reached the higher levels in the CHEK system, especially the HLC training and then those that made it to CHEK level 4, where we get deep into the psyche and mental emotional issues and the things that are hiding behind the surface of everything but are driving it, then as more and more of them went into the world and other people saw how helpful it was and how effective they were, it started bringing a new breed of students to me, which made it easier for me to share what I've always been doing, but couldn't really share out in a classroom without it causing a lot of confusion, chaos, and insecurity in people because they just weren't mature enough to handle it. So, and I think, just because I've been working on myself my whole life, and I've been doing, January, I'll have been doing this for 39 years. So I've had a lot of time to go through phases, and so I think I'm just at a point in my life now where I've matured as a teacher, I've matured as a therapist, I've matured in my spiritual practices, I've confronted about everything life can throw at you, from really hard times to great success. And I'm at a point now where I feel a lot of gratitude because the CHEK Academy is so well run and so beautifully structured. It's, as you probably know, it's a 4-year program with mentorship, and it's a really top-notch program so that someone can come in, even if they're changing professions. You could be a truck driver coming into the CHEK profession as a CHEK professional, and then you have 4 years of training, and then you'll be one of the best holistic health practitioners in the world. So it's been really beautiful for me to see the development of my own education system. And Gavin, our CEO, he was the one that designed the CHEK Academy to deal with the fact that there was so much information in the Institute and so many different branches that we wanted to bring it into a working system. So instead of people just getting corrective exercise or just holistic lifestyle coaching or just PPS success mastery training, that they would get the entire package as an integrated system. And since the Academy's been running, which I think is about 5 years now, the quality of the students coming out is incredible because they're super well educated. And it's not, a system that you just take multiple choice tests and fluff your way through. It's, it's rigorous. There's a lot of testing, and you have to really practice and be real,
Introducing the next big thing in functional training, the Escape Barrow, a revolutionary training tool that combines a loaded farmer's carry with a sled push to develop hip, grip, and core strength. Developed in partnership with Pete Holman, inventor of the TRX Rip Trainer and Nautilus Glute Drive, the Escape Barrow can be rolled, pushed, dragged and carried. The Escape Barrow packs a punch with an impressive load capacity of 440 pounds, and with a 2-stage galvanized paint covering process, it's also ideal for outdoor use. So head over to escapefitness.com/barrow. That's escapefitness.com/barrow to find out more. Enjoy the rest of this episode. Do you think with general information and your experience as an educator, and you mentioned that sometimes explaining things in a classroom can probably make people feel unusual and insecure. In your experience with learning, do you find that for people for it to be successful, you've got to start people on a certain level and build them up, as opposed to if they hear something that maybe they're not ready or they don't understand the foundations, they either don't get it or they dismiss it? Because I'm trying to, there's a lot of information out there, and you talk about a lot of amazing stuff, but my guess is maybe some people that might not totally appreciate it haven't sort of understood some of those basics that have got you to that point. And if that is where someone is on any subject, is there a sort of recommendation where you may not be understand it because you've not understood some of the basic principles that may get there?
Yeah, that's why the Institute's structured the way it is. So, for example, I regularly get people like nutritionists and people that have degrees in exercise and sports science or kinesiology or many other things contacting the Institute or me and saying, well, can I skip this part of your program because I have this degree? And I say, well, actually, the more degrees you have, the more important it is for you to start at the beginning, because you're probably super confused and actually think you know what you're doing. But when you really come to the realization that I have a system that is not taught in universities, that is based on foundation principles. For example, I've never met a nutritionist yet, except one or two, like Autumn Smith, the founder of Paleo Valley, that actually understands soil science. So I say to nutrition, if you don't understand soil science, I got news for you. You cannot understand nutrition. It's impossible, because nutrition begins in the soil, So the system's structured so you start with Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1 to enter in. That's our public program, which really teaches you how to use the principles in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, and takes you even beyond that. But it's a basic training that anyone can do. And it's our public access program. Then HLC2 is the first level of professional training, and it's a 5-day intensive, it's 8 hours a day for 5 days. Then HLC3 is for advanced training. And then we have our exercise coach, which is now called IMS1, which would be my version of a very holistic personal trainer / strength coach certification, but shows you how to integrate diet and lifestyle factors as well, so that even from the very bottom, you're thinking holistically. So I have to build people in layers, because there's so much foundation information that if you don't understand and you jump a level, you won't really understand why we're saying or doing things. So that leaves you in a dangerous situation, because if somebody asks you a question and you can't answer it because you never did the basics, you're not going to look good, you're not going to do good. It's like anything, if you don't know the rules of any game, it's, just because you can slam a basketball doesn't mean you know how to play basketball, right? You have to learn the rules of the game. So really, I build the whole system so that you learn first principles, second principles, and it's all built in a structured system. So by the time you get to the top, you have mastery of each of the functional levels. Thank you.
I guess the way I came to know you was in what you would call the fitness industry, learning about exercises. Do you...
Lonnie?
Ronnie, probably throw my questions off now.
It's a vaporized bag of some clean tobacco and herbs with some essential oils. No smoke. It's all water vapor, so don't think we're killing ourselves.
I came in, just because I was interested in working out and fitness. If you look at what I would classed as, you know, the general fitness industry, fitness machine, and what people learn as they come into it, some of the basic stuff. Like, do you think that that is the correct entry point? So if somebody's trying to get people to improve themselves physically, in a lot of cases they come in because they want to lose weight or they want to build some kind of muscle or whatever. Is that in your world a good place to start? Or if you are thinking about that as a career, or if you're looking to get someone to help you with those goals, is there something more fundamental that you should probably be learning before you get onto that, or is that the entry point?
No, it isn't. That's a very dangerous misconception out there. And before I address that, I'll share one thing that's a common misunderstanding of me, because you've just hit on it. You see, your exposure to me was in exercise conferences, but I lecture in osteopathic conferences. I lecture to naturopaths, to medical doctors in medical schools and physical therapy schools and chiropractic schools, massage therapy conferences. So even nutrition I'm lecturing in. So people's perception of me is always the arena that they've met me in or that they're in. So unless someone's following me around the world, they wouldn't realize I've got my iron in lots of fires, because I've always been teaching holistic health, and my system is a multidisciplinary system. So in any class in the CHEK Institute, you could have a medical doctor, a nurse, a chiropractor, an osteopath, a massage therapist, a strength coach, a personal trainer, and a housewife that's changing careers. And I'm teaching them all how to cross-educate. And I'm showing, for example, when I teach a neurological evaluation, I'm showing them how do you recognize when somebody has a problem that requires a skilled medical professional. How do you know the difference between needing an endocrinologist, a neurologist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and a hypnotherapist, and a Feldenkrais practitioner, an Alexander practitioner, a homeopath, a herbologist? Because it's a dangerous thing to think that any one of us can know enough to deal with the common problems that most people come with. And most people going to a gym have almost no understanding of the foundation principles of nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement. So if you're going to a gym where you classically add a lot of stress to an already stressed out body, but you don't know about hydration, you don't know about nutrition, you don't know about sleep, you don't know about effective breathing, and you don't know how to use your mind properly, then you take a very out of balance system, add a lot of stress to it. So you see short-term changes in the body shape, you see muscle gains, but then you see a string of injuries that almost always leads people to going into the gym for a while and out to get rehabbed, and then back, and then they hurt something else. So you see this bouncing in and out until oftentimes they just give up because their body keeps breaking down. And to give you an example, research shows that what they've done is they've done MRIs on large cross sections of people that have never had any incidents of back pain. And the MRIs showed that 72% of them had a disc bulge, either a mild, moderate, or significant disc bulge, and they didn't even know it. So if you just look at that one fact alone, and you think of what most trainers do to people, people are walking time bombs, but exercise professionals at large have almost no assessment skills. So I say, if you're not assessing, you are guessing. And do you want people to pay you to guess when their body and their health and their vitality is at stake? And you see piles of garbage being put in people's mouths in gyms, from sports bars to junk protein powders to shake mixes. I mean, the list of crap in gyms is enough to, I mean, if you fed what they feed people in gyms to laboratory rats, it would kill them probably in a month. So this is why I teach a holistic approach. And that's why my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, shows you all these things. And right in the beginning, as you know, there's a series of questionnaires to identify which systems in your body are under stress, so you know how to bring those into balance. And you'll see that I showed the higher the total stress load on your body is, the more gentle your exercise routine has to be. But paradoxically, especially athletic people, when they start gaining weight or getting out of shape, they think, oh, it means I'm not training hard enough. So they go to the gym with their tired body and whip it. And then they end up with burned out adrenal glands, and then they become hypothyroid, then they get lethargic and they can't think straight, they start gaining weight, then they start using biohacking tricks and pills and gimmicks, and then they get further and further down the rabbit hole until they end up having to come see somebody like me to unravel this spaghetti web of mess that they've created. And reading magazines and watching social media is a very dangerous way to go, and television, because the level of education in the exercise industry is extremely low. When you consider you have to go to school for 4 years to be a physical therapist, who usually are only using stretch bands and pink 2-pound dumbbells, yet you can take people off the street and next thing you know they're in a CrossFit class beating the hell out of themselves, and people have not a single bit, largely, of education as to how to assess people, how to progress an exercise program, how to select exercises properly, how to identify red flags. You're talking about a meat grinder. And, I've made my whole career dealing with all the people that get destroyed doing that kind of stuff, including the best athletes in the world. And, I've worked with so many of the best athletes and sports teams in the world, I can't even remember them all anymore. As I shared with you, January, I'll have been doing this for 39 years. So I've seen a lot of fads come and go, and I've seen what happens to people. And most people just believe what they see on television or read in magazines or whatever the flavor of the month is, and they get caught in all this corporate bogus nutrition and sports stuff and biohacking, and it's just a dead-end road. That's why my Integrated Movement Science 1, which used to be Exercise Coach, teaches anybody that wants to use exercise scientifically and holistically how to begin working with a client, what to assess, how to look into their diet and their lifestyle factors, how to look at their overall levels of stress, and then how to use exercise scientifically to balance their bodies and progress them in an intelligent manner. So first we look at flexibility and stability and make sure their posture's right and their body's balanced, their muscles are balanced. Then we go from flexibility and stability to strength, so basic strength development, and only then do we go to power. But if you go to most gyms, people start at power, and as they get in trouble, they go backwards through the chain until they're broken because they keep getting more and more limited in what they can do, and then they're on the floor injured. So I built the system to consider everyone, no matter how famous or how fit they are, has to go through these initial stages so we can evaluate how flexible and stable they are. Do they have functional strength? And do they have the foundation for power movement so that they can do it without injuring themselves and actually maintain their growth and development in their fitness or athleticism so they don't have unnecessary injuries and setbacks?
I guess if someone's listening who doesn't know your work, they could say, well, yeah, you've got a system and you've got a business that sells this sort of stuff. Obviously you would say that you've got one of the best systems out there, but are you unique in what you're teaching, or are there other people that also appreciate and understand that, but there's just a lot of people who are coming at it from a different perspective as you?
Well, you see, I began my career first as an athlete. So when I was young, I was highly competitive and ranked as a motocross racer. I was a kickboxer. I was a competitive boxer. I played all sports in high school. I was a stock car racer and a drag racer. So my initial development was not only very holistic, living on a farm and having a yogi mother and a farmer father. So I got all the spiritual development and holistic grounding and the understanding of nature and the soil and where food really comes from. But professionally, I became the trainer of the Army boxing team, where I was working with 30 of the best athletes in the world. And as the trainer of the Army boxing team, our gym was the headquarters for all the elite Army sports, from track and field to powerlifting. So I was interacting with athletes from every sport, and I was the only guy that they knew to go to when they were injured because there was nobody that knew these kinds of things. So what then happened is I went to school to be a sports massage therapist, and then I continued my studies and became licensed as a holistic health practitioner. And then, as you know, I traveled the world for many, many years studying with the best doctors and therapists and experts on key topics that I kept running into as problems. So who's the best at cervical disc injuries? Who's the best at neurological pathology? Who's the best at digestive and eliminative problems? Who's the best at the endocrine system, who's the best in psychological issues, who's the best at behavioral change. So as I kept running into problems and going deeper and deeper into what it was that was really causing the problems that everybody's treating superficially, I began to see that I had to put things that are foundational first, but I also had to educate my students on how to get behind the surface. Like, people don't just get back injuries in gyms because they have weak backs. They usually get back injuries in gyms because their guts are all inflamed and they don't know how to lift properly. And when you say, okay, lift properly, I could pull out personal trainer certification manuals from many different organizations showing you that there's no agreement on how to do anything like a deadlift or a squat or any of these types of things. And because most of the people designing these courses have almost no knowledge of functional anatomy, kinesiology, physiology, or the basic sciences you have to do to really design a program like that effectively. But the key point I'm driving at is my professional career is that of a therapist. So by the time I developed the CHEK Institute in 1995, I already had 15 years of clinical experience dealing with the most screwed up people on the planet, including world-class athletes of many different sports and types. So I was able to see, what is it that you got as an injury and how did you get it? And what are the factors I have to look at to rehabilitate you? And after years and years of seeing these patterns emerging over and over again, by the time I developed the CHEK Institute, I said, okay, the most common cause of back problems is these things. The most common problem of digestive troubles is these things. The most common cause of relationship problems is these things. The most common cause of emotional crisis or anxiety or depression is these things. So I built the Institute so that you begin by screening people for the problems that cause the problems. You understand? Mm-hmm. I'm showing people how to get to the etiology, and to do that, you have to look at nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement. If you skip any of those, you will miss an underlying causative force, and you will keep treating symptoms. So you'll keep treating the surface issues, the shoulder that keeps getting hurt, the back that keeps getting hurt, the guts that keep not working. So are there people out there that do these things? There are some, but most of them are very narrow in their focus, because you can't develop a program that's deeper than you are. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I've been doing this for 39 years, and I've studied intensively and practiced intensively and engaged all this in my own athletic career and in my own development. So
you can't develop a program that's deeper than you are, meaning your own sort of, or the level of you and the people that are in your team is that where you've gone and sort of like bumped up to these sort of situations where you had to go away and sort of learn more things
Yes.
to kind of figure out how to break through it, right?
What I'm saying is, by the time I developed the CHEK Institute's education programs, I had been through so many of my own challenges as an athlete, a father, a businessman, a therapist, and I had worked through so many challenges with people from all walks of life, from business professionals to athletes to housewives to injured workers to, I owned a physical therapy clinic, so I was dealing with insurance cases and workman's compensation cases and everything you can think of. So by the time I developed the Institute, I had a very comprehensive knowledge of very advanced rehabilitation, neurological rehabilitation, motor development, childhood development, infant development, psychological development. So the point that I'm making is the Institute is a reflection of my own development. It's a reflection of my own depth of penetration into the key sciences that you have to have an understanding of, or all you can do is just cut and paste somebody else's stuff and call it your own course. But just because you can regurgitate something I wrote or someone else wrote in a book doesn't mean you really understand it or that you even practice it. I always tell people the best proof of my system is me. I'm a 61-year-old still fit athlete who can outlift young professional athletes and do things that they still can't do, and they all think I'm using steroids, which I always laugh at them about.
I was going to ask that, like, has for you, like, in terms of fitness as a meaning, like, has it changed your outlook and the way you communicate from, you know, from when you was in your 30s and now you're in your 60s doing, you know, just been outside looking at some of the rocks that you've been moving around. Like, have you changed the way you've looked at things in terms of the problems that you're able to solve as you've now become a person who's in his 60s?
I think for my own personal approach to exercise, I don't need to prove anything to anybody anymore. You know, when I was younger, I was working with a lot of professional sports teams, the only way you can get their attention is if you can demonstrate to them something that they can't do. So it wasn't unusual for me to go work on a sports team and outlift almost everybody on the team. And I would remind them that I am a therapist, not a professional athlete. So you better get your shit together because I could take your job. And, you know, of course they would laugh, but they would realize I'm telling the truth. And in order to get people to respect what I was doing, I had to be able to lift heavy weights. And I had to be able to do things that they knew for sure was hard to do. So, you know, I would do single arm clean and jerks with 160-pound dumbbells repeatedly and say, give it a try. And even seasoned athletes couldn't even get it off the ground. They didn't even have the grip strength to lift the thing off the floor. I'm talking professional football players and people like that. So immediately they knew, whatever the hell this guy's doing, it works. You know, but what happened is I reached a point where I realized I was getting a lot of egomaniacs into my courses that just wanted to impress people, and that I had to change the orientation of the training because that wasn't really what I was trying to do. I was just trying to demonstrate that the principles that I teach work in application. And so...
Is that an easy thing, on that, is that an easy thing, I suppose, for younger people? Because I can understand that. Like, if you don't have the sort of the reputation like you've got, and you've got to somehow prove yourself, then the ego is there. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to show you, and I'm going to do things that probably may not be in alignment with what they should be, but it seems as though that's the right thing to do at the moment. Is that an easy trap to fall into?
Yeah, because depending on your age at any given time, you can only have so much psychological development and maturity. I'm a very different man at 61 than I was at 35 or 45 or even 50. You know, I look back and think of how smart I thought I was when I was in my 30s and realize I was really just a dumb fuck. You know, I mean, I was a smarter dumb fuck than most, but I look back and go, it's a miracle that I was able to help so many people. And I realized that it was my love and my passion that probably had the most healing force. Granted, I had a lot higher skill level than most because I did a lot of extensive study and took my profession very seriously. But compared to the knowledge and the depth of wisdom I have now, I look back and think it's a miracle that I was able to help that many people. So, because we typically grow and mature, we learn not to sweat the small stuff. We learn, walk, don't run. We learn money isn't everything. We learn, that relationships can be tricky and you need to pay attention to who you commit yourself to, whether it be business or sexual relationships or marriages or, how old are you, 50?
52 the other day.
Yeah, so I mean, just think of who you were when you were 30 and then 40 and then now, and you'll see certainly...
We're amazed I'm sitting here.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, but most of the people that are starting, especially exercise type systems, they're usually in their 30s or late 20s, so they're still full of themselves, and they don't really know their own limitations or their lack of depth. I was fortunate because I built my entire system on foundation principles. I've never lost a debate in a professional conference, and people have often said to me, how is it that you're not afraid to go and debate all these people with MDs and master's degrees and PhDs? And I say, because it's impossible to beat a guy in a debate who is telling you that you got to eat real food, you got to pay attention to the soil, you got to get enough sleep, you got to breathe properly, you got to move enough, you got to do it intelligently, and you got to learn how to manage your mind. I mean, how do you get around that? So when they're promoting all these testosterone boosters and fancy protein powders and shortcuts, of course, I just annihilate all that stuff. And so, the point I'm making is many people say, well, is there anything you would change in your system because it's been around for a long time? No, or I would have changed it. The human body does not change that quickly, right? The human psychology has been around for as long as human beings have been around. We've always had to deal with the same challenges. We always want sex. We always want food. We always want safety and shelter. We always want warmth. We always want love. And, we always want to feel appreciated by other people. Those are core human functions. So, you look at my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. There's nothing in there that's incorrect today. You go back to my initial programs when I first developed the Institute, there's nothing in there that's wrong. Why? Because it's how do you assess a human body? How do you balance the human body? What is correct lifting technique? What are the foundations of nutrition? How do you use your mind effectively? How do you coach somebody effectively? Those things are principles, right? They're not, it's not so much oriented to the technique. There is technique involved, but it's principles. And you can't escape those principles. If you go to the conferences and you think of those principles I've just mentioned, you'll see all sorts of experts saying things that evade those principles. Biohacking is the complete evasion of those basic principles. You're biohacking because you're not getting enough sleep, because you're not eating good food, because you're not exercising properly, ... So here you are walking around wondering why you can't think straight and why you're tired all the time, so you think some gadget or some pill is going to be the magic. But all that does is take a screwed up philosophical misunderstanding and bad lifestyle habits and push it to an extreme. It's like taking an athlete that's tired and giving them steroids so they can perform better, and they end up with adrenal exhaustion and liver failure.
So are you again, because biohacking is like the big, it's the thing at the moment. Everybody's like looking for the next hack. Are you pretty much, it sounds like you're pretty much against that as a concept, are you?
Well, I think biohacking is a very dangerous concept. Steiner said, human beings will continue to invent technologies outside of themselves until they realize all of these technologies are inferior copies of the technology within themselves. The question is, will they figure it out before they destroy the world? Well, look around. Look at all the problems we now are facing with AI. Look at all the problems we're facing with PSYOPs operations and COVID and government control and spy systems and psychological manipulation of people. That's all biohacking. Listen to Naval Harari and Klaus Schwab. They use the word hacking, biohacking all the time. They're saying we can hack the human beings. You will no longer have free will. There's no need for the soul. There's no need for God. All that is over. That's the biohacking. That's where it takes you. The key point is, look, some people will have had this experience. I remember when I first bought a digital watch, and I wore it for a few years, and one day I looked at an analog clock, with the sweep hands, and I had to think of how to read it. I went, holy shit, I forgot how to read a clock because I've been looking at a digital clock with numbers. And I realized right then and there that this thing tells me time, but it's taking me away from the analog process, the flow of time. So what was a flow of time, morning, noon, night, now become a series of numbers. Biohacking takes a human being and turns it into a bunch of numbers or data. You cannot know yourself through data. You have to look at where the data is coming from. Why is it that you're not sleeping well? Why is it that you're needing a calorie counter? If I give you a calorie counter, first of all, those are all biohacking devices are based on algorithms. Algorithms are based on assessments of fairly large populations, and then they develop averages. The average person responds this way, but there's no such thing as an average person, right? You're not an average person. And if you study a book like Biochemical Individuality by Roger Williams, he shows you that we're as different on the inside as we are on the outside. There's classically 19 different types of stomachs in people's bodies. Byron Robinson, MD, showed that the length of the intestinal tract from mouth to anus can be as short as 21 feet in some people and as long as 42 feet in other people, depending on their genetics and how much meat they ate. The more meat that they ate in their natural environment, the shorter their intestinal tracts were, and the more they were toward vegetarian diets, like various places in India or places where there's not a lot of meat, the longer their intestinal tract gets because they have to have more time to absorb protein out of fiber. So whenever you're using any kind of biohacking, you're actually putting yourself into a data set that does not have any way to actually pay attention to your unique physiology, psychology, and needs. And I'll give you a perfect example. I was coaching Mike Salemi. Do you know Mike Salemi? Very, very famous athlete, very successful, multiple kettlebell masters, and one of the best athletes I've ever worked with. Well, the Oura ring people gave him a Oura ring.
Going on. You're going to say it's bad now.
Well, I'm going to tell you the truth. And he came to me and he was all excited about this, but I had taught him a system that I teach all my athletes and some of my patients for determining his physiological stress load by monitoring his heart, his resting heart rate every morning. So I show people how to monitor their morning heart rate, take it for 7 days, average it. And then I show that if your morning heart rate rises 3 beats or more above your average, it's an indication that you're under stress. If it's 4 beats above, you need to cut your training down to working in. If it's 5 beats above, you need to take the day off and completely relax, because after years of monitoring athletes and patients with this system, I found that by the time they got a 4 to 5 beat jump in their average morning heart rate, and you re-average it every week, so you're constantly adjusting as your body changes, that within 72 hours they were going to get sick. And consistently, within 72 hours of a 4 to 5 beat jump, they got sick or they got injured because they were too depleted. So when Mike came to me with his Oura ring, I said, okay, now you're going to see why I don't use this technology, but I want you to test this. You keep doing what I taught you to do and see what your heart tells you is your readiness, because I was training at very high level for very intense competitions, and you see what the Oura ring tells you. And one day, he got a hold of me. He woke up feeling really shitty, had a 5 beat above average, didn't feel like he could even train at all, but his Oura ring said he was ready for a high level of training. He said that he was in top shape, however it measures it out. And he showed me the date. He said, look at this, is exactly what you said would happen. I said, yes, because it's not assessing Mike Salemi. It's assessing you against an algorithm, and there's not one single world-class kettlebell lifter in that algorithm.
No. Do you think, though, because it does do your resting heart rate, well, your morning heart rate, which is I find that quite interesting to track. And I have noticed that you're right. I tend to ignore some of the information it tells you whether you should train or not, but I do keep an eye on the heart rate one.
Yeah.
Do you think just for giving you like basic tracking of seeing what certain things are, so that you can interpret them in your own way, is useful as a measurement? Or
it can be, and there is a way to use biohacking technology, but most people don't do it. So I'll share something with you. So you're relying on that ring to tell you what your heart rate is. But all you got to do is put your fingers on your carotid artery. And then you're actually directly bringing your consciousness to your heart and your heartbeat, and you're having a relationship. And you have to say, what is making your heart beat?
Yeah, good question. Well, your mind, I guess.
Well, your mind is secondary.
Okay.
Every spiritual tradition for thousands of years says that the heart is the home of the soul. Spirit is the flow of energy and information. The soul experiences spirit. So your thoughts are spirit, and how you respond to them is your soul, what you feel inside, right? The point is, when you're connecting to your own heartbeat, you're going to the essence of who Matthew is, and you're developing a relationship with the part of yourself that ring is disconnecting you from, and you're not learning anything about yourself, you're just learning what a gadget's telling you. So you never really, using those technologies, you never develop an honest, intimate relationship with yourself. You don't bring your consciousness into yourself, you externalize it to a device. And so what I've seen happen over and over again, for example, for years, I coached athletes of all types, triathletes, biathletes, track and field runners. In 88 Olympic trials, I had 10 of my own athletes make it to the Olympic trials that I coached. And so I would use heart rate monitors with them, but I would say, I only want you to use the heart rate long enough that you get a conscious sense of your relative perceived exertion. So what does that mean? When you look at your heart rate monitor and you see your heart's at 200 beats a minute, pay attention to what that feels like, because then I'm going to take your heart rate monitor from you. I'm going to have you go out and run a few repeat 400 meters on a 1 minute rest period, and I want you to tell me when your heart rate's at 200. Because then you don't need the heart monitor anymore. Now you're having an intimate relationship with yourself, and you're taking responsibility for directing your consciousness to what you should be able to monitor.
I get it, yeah.
Right? So when you use technologies that disconnect people from a relationship with themselves, then they're now doing the same thing as going to a doctor. They wait for a gadget to tell them something that they could sense in the prodromal state or the developmental state long before it was a problem.
I get it, yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
The device only tells you something's wrong when it can measure it. But you know, for example, if you're under financial stress, that it's causing changes inside of you. Your digestion's not optimal, you can't sleep as well, you got a big problem to solve, you're under a lot of pressure. Well, by the time the ring tells you that there's a problem, you should have already known that you better start sleeping more and managing yourself better to get through this stress. So to me, as a teacher and a therapist, my job is to optimize a person's autonomy so they don't need me. I don't want athletes to need me. I don't want patients to need me. I want them to be self-sufficient. I pride myself as a coach, a therapist, and a life coach in teaching people the skills they need to be self-sufficient so they can go out into the world and really know how to take care of themselves and make things happen in the world without having some device or somebody else tell them what to do. Or you get what we had with COVID, where people run off to the doctors and they can't even see what's in the vaccines. It's blank. There's no way you can sue those guys if they poison you or kill you, which we know is happening at a very rapid rate, but they do it anyhow because they haven't learned to think for themselves. They haven't learned to have a relationship with themselves. They don't have connection to their own heart and their own intuition. They don't ask the question, is it really true? So what you get is sheep herd mentality. And gadgets are a great way to guide sheep in any direction you want to guide them.
Just on that then, so in general, when you're looking at, because there is an increasing amount of new, I suppose, technologies enabled us to measure all kinds of things now that people are relying on. Like I've used this for a few years, and I've become almost like starting to rely on this as a tool, for reasons to understand my sleep and everything. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I also appreciate the fact that this is disconnecting me with myself and how I feel and how I should use it. So as a general rule, like not say that we should sort of get rid of all devices, but I guess in a general, are you saying, look, use them as a support and maybe kind of like a check-in, but primarily try and understand, work on yourself and put the effort into figuring out your own self.
Use them as a coach.
Okay, yeah.
So it's the same with plant medicines. When people do medicine ceremonies with me using shamanic medicines, psychedelic medicines, they always are amazed that all of a sudden they can see the auras on trees or see plants and trees breathing, and how even stones become alive, and how they can see into other dimensions, or many things that just blow their minds. And I say, good. What the medicines are doing is showing you what's beyond the limitations of the filter of your own ego system. The secret is, now that you know you can see the aura on a tree, don't keep doing mushrooms. Go sit next to a tree, go into meditation, relax your mind, and look for the aura on the tree, because you know it's there. The medicine showed you that it's there. But what happens is people just doing more and more LSD, mushrooms, DMT, and the next thing you know, they're just all screwed up because they've just blown themselves into oblivion, and now their mind's scattered like someone put a hand grenade in their head. But if you use these medicines like training wheels, and you use biohacking like training wheels, say, okay, I'm going to use this heart rate monitor to learn what my perceived rate of exertion. What does it feel like when my heart rate's at 70%? What does it feel like when it's at 80%, 90%, 100%? That way I know what I'm doing. What is it, whatever the biohacking device can tell you about yourself is only telling you something that you should already know how to feel. So for example, if I used a biohacking device to measure how much hydrochloric acid you had in your stomach, I could teach you to be aware of what it feels like when your body stops producing enough hydrochloric acid. There's characteristic symptoms such as burping up food, having acid in your mouth, feeling like you're full all the time, and even full and hungry because you can't, if you don't have enough hydrochloric acid, your stomach won't let the food move into the small intestine because it cannot break food down that's still in a state of protein. The hydrochloric acid has to make proteins into amino acids, and hydrochloric acid is the number one thing that kills pathogenic organisms like parasites. So people that don't have enough hydrochloric acid have stomachs that are backed up right up to their throat, and then they're highly susceptible to fungal and parasite and bacterial infections. So I say, okay, let me show you the signs and symptoms of low hydrochloric acid production and excessive hydrochloric acid production, which usually is a side effect of stress, and coffee can stimulate hydrochloric acid production. So people that are drinking coffee and don't realize it can actually be burning their stomach because coffee is stimulating the hydrochloric acid. Next thing you know, they're running to the doctor and getting drugs for ulcers that they're creating, not knowing what they're doing to themselves. But the biohacking device isn't going to tell you how it's happening. It's just going to tell you what has happened. So the point that I'm making is, just like I use plant medicines to teach people how to get beyond the limitations of their ego and to see what's really going on, that their programming and filtration is blocking out, if I can use a biohacking device to teach somebody to monitor any different things, calorie counting's the most dangerous at all because, I could give you a long list of reasons that just doesn't work at all. So what happens is people start monitoring their calories, but they don't realize there's a tremendous, if your biohacking device says you did 150 calories worth of exercise, and now you're only going to eat 150 calories, you're overlooking what's the quality of the food, how much nutrition's in the food. A calorie says nothing about nutritional value. It's just a measure of energy. It could be straight white sugar or styrofoam. It doesn't matter. Or junk Cheerios with glyphosate all over it. It doesn't tell you about your body's ability to metabolize, digest, assimilate, and eliminate. It takes about 55% of the calories eaten just to run food from mouth to anus. Just to do the energy, the work of taking food from mouth to anus is 55% of all your calories. The question is, how efficient is that system? Hardly anybody has a healthy digestive system, an eliminative system, or metabolic system. Look, metabolic syndrome's as common as white bread today. So what I'm showing you is that just the idea of calorie counting is super dangerous because it's based on a completely false premise. One, calories are measures of energy. They're not measures of nutrition. The amount of calories that you eat is not a measure of what you need because the calorie does not tell you what your body needs. And if you're just going by that, you're not paying attention to the difference between your body wanting potassium and needing a banana or needing more red meat because it needs protein or needing blueberries because it needs antioxidants. So what happens is people start relying on digital technology to tell them how to run their lives, but they're not really paying attention to the causative factors that the body's always informing us of by symptoms, and they're drugging the symptoms, right? So there's a narrow application of biohacking, but it has to be done intelligently, and there's not very many people that know themselves well enough to teach others how to know themselves. So what you end up with is a runaway application of technological wonders that are not so wonderful at the end of the day. And how do I know that? Well, I've got a long history of all these people coming to me with all their devices, all their pills and gimmicks being completely screwed up, and me getting rid of all of it, taking them right back down to the basics, and them going, why the hell was I ever doing this shit? And the answer is,
well, it's a shortcut, isn't it?
You read too many magazines and you believe it.
Would you say that, because that was one of the things I was going to ask you, and you brought it up, people doing psychedelics, and there seems to be this culture of people wanting to do that, and I was curious to know, why do you think now there's there's that sort of drive to it, because it's seen almost like to have this kind of health link to it. Do this and you'll be more enlightened, and et cetera, but I can also see what you're referring to, where people are not using it for the training wheels. They're actually using it, and then that becomes
using
another
it as
addiction.
an escape vehicle.
An escape, yeah.
Now, we're in the third wave of what's called the third wave of the psychedelic revolution. We had the original psychedelic revolution in the 60s. We had the Timothy Leary, Ram Dass era during the Vietnam. But what you'll see when you look at the history of psychedelics on the planet is that whenever people start getting confined and repressed and confused about how to deal with the stresses and the immoralities and the inadequacies, for example, the last psychedelic wave came when feminism was bursting, when black and colored and mixed races wanted equality. So the whole thing with Martin Luther King and all of these people trying to, get black people to have fair rights, which I'm totally for, right? And then Vietnam was a shock because too many people knew that we didn't belong over there. That wasn't a real war. We were just raping another country, which every one of the wars we've been in is the same story. If you study all this stuff, you see this is all just manipulation of the public mind. But young people are sensitive to the truth. They're sensitive to immorality. They're sensitive to when they're being lied to and manipulated. They're sensitive to when they're losing their freedoms. They're sensitive to when they're being repressed. So because psychedelics actually help you out of the limitations of your mind and open you up to a much higher level of creativity and possibility, they're sort of the antidote to the narrow focus that stress creates, right? Many people have used psychedelics in think tanks like Silicon Valley, elite soldiers, people that are like really trying to achieve very high levels of creativity, productivity, product development, spiritual development, because they break down the default mode network, which is the structures in the brain that create the ego or the limited self, so that the unconscious begins to pour up into consciousness, and your filtration system breaks down. The higher the dose, the more you become, shall we say, fused with what's really going on, and it can be quite wild and shocking. So what happens is, whenever there's some kind of stress, limitation, or excessive constraint in any environment, there's a natural drive to drugs that help open our minds to possibilities and help us find a deeper connection to God, because religion's been around for so long because there's nothing better to carry you through tough times than a belief in God. As the old story goes, philosophically, they say you can believe in God, but God may not be true. Or you can not believe in God because you don't think it's true. But if you believe in God and you die and you find out it is true, you're probably in a better position than if you didn't believe in God. Because if you had a belief in God, there's always something beyond yourself. There's something greater. And most people's belief in God is that God is love. So if you say you really believe in God, you really believe in the power of love. If you don't have something bigger than yourself to anchor you and support you, it's a lot harder to deal with the challenges in the world. And what most plant medicines do is just blow your heart wide open so you can actually feel love again, even in stressful times. And when you can get out of the stress-oriented, narrow focus, left brain dominant, high cortisol, high adrenaline approach to life, then you're actually in position, often for the first time, to put things in perspective and say, how can I create changes in myself or in my environment or in my relationships that are more reflective of the love and the connection that I now know exists as a natural state of nature and as our natural state as human beings, not what's being pushed into us or programmed into us or contrived to get us to be profitable and good little conformists. So we're seeing a huge revolution in the psychedelic world right now because people are scared to death. And they know we're being manipulated. They know we're being lied to by every government agency, every medical agency, the banking system, the education system, the political system. It's just full of criminals. But the paradox of it is, Lao Tzu said the government always reflects the people. So what we're seeing now through social media and the events of the world is actually our own shadow being projected back at us. If you don't take responsibility for yourself and your own choices, somebody else will do it for you. And if it's profitable to control you, they're going to do it, right? There's an old saying, if you're not working for your own goals, rest assured you're working for your bosses. Well, if you're not working for your own goals and your own sovereignty and your own freedom, rest assured somebody else will take it from you and make you profitable to them, right? Forced vaccinations, that's not freedom, that's not sovereignty, that's not science, that's not medicine. That's straight up mind control, and it's exactly how Hitler ushered in the extermination of millions of Jews, right? So when people are facing this at a conscious or unconscious level, they know they're facing a serious threat. And so what happens is, I think there's something inside of us. I've got books in my library, very comprehensive books, showing that every animal and insect ever studied knows what plant medicines get it high. Ants, bees, bears, they all know how to get high. And they all use it to keep them from being too stressed and to bring joy and connection into them. So this is not just a human phenomenon. This is a natural phenomenon. And isn't it interesting that Mother Nature left these mind-altering substances all over the place, specifically because the problem is, see, if your mind gets too rigid, it becomes a very limiting force. I mean, all you got to do is look.
Dangerous as well.
Very
because
dangerous.
People become scared and do irrational things, I suppose.
See, the problem is belief systems stop people from asking questions. When you believe something, you think you know. If you think you know what God wants, then you are in a very dangerous position, because you can't know what God wants till you become God. And when you become God, there's no you to know anything about it. You understand? For me to become Matthew, I would have to get rid of Paul. So I would have no way to report the experience. So when you start telling people what they should do or what God wants, like Orthodox religion, now what you're doing is you're creating a belief system, and to the degree you believe it, you stop asking the most important question of your life. Is it really true? And how is it working for me? Well, all you got to do is study the history of religiously motivated war. Religion's the number one cause of war in the history of man, all because they believed that their God was bigger than the other person's God, their gods were. So all I'm saying is belief systems are extremely dangerous because they give people permission to stop thinking for themselves. Scientific materialism is a belief system, and it's dangerous. Any ism, Nazism, fascism, vegetarianism, these are all belief systems that externalize authority to some leader aside from yourself. So what you do is you keep yourself in the position of being a child while your chosen daddy figure just has their way with you, right?
But with that on the side, we talked about psychedelics, the fact that it does open and there's a lot of positives and it is in nature. Mm-hmm. Which as you said at the beginning, it does become this place to escape, and then it becomes not healthy. How do you get that balance then from it becoming stabilize the wheels until you can figure it out yourself and see the aura around the trees? How do you get that kind of balance? Well,
it's a great question. First of all, in my system, you have to have a dream for yourself. You have to have a dream goal or objective. Otherwise, you don't know why you're doing it, you know? For example, if I said to you, Matthew, as a successful businessman, how much alcohol could you use on a regular basis before it actually began to deteriorate and erode your ability to run your business, maintain your dream of serving people that way and meeting your goals? Would you be able to?
Very little.
But you're aware of it.
Oh, well, yeah, because I was going to ask about alcohol, but yeah, carry on. Very little before it starts to, probably zero, if I'm honest.
Okay, because it's a very dangerous drug. It's far more dangerous than any psychedelic. And psychedelics are not addictive. Alcohol is highly addictive. So is white sugar. White sugar is as addictive as morphine and heroin. Most people don't know that. It's just legal, so people think they're not doing drugs, but they're mainlining this shit all day long. And I got multiple books in my library on the extreme damage that's caused to human health and their thinking and their physiology. But the point that I'm driving at is you just identified it. Now I'm going to ask you another question. If you were living on welfare or mooching off your parents and you did not have a reason to manage yourself and a dream for your own life and goals, how would you manage your use of alcohol differently?
Well, I've been there when I was a teenager, and yeah, it would be. It's not really a concern because it's like, okay, well, why not? What else is there to do?
Right. So it boils down to one key thing.
Purpose
if you don't have a sense of meaning in your life, then you don't have a compass bearing to let you know when the psychedelics or anything else, from sex to drugs to alcohol to whatever it is, food, is pulling you off your compass bearing.
Right.
So to effectively use psychedelics, you have to have a clear sense of who am I, why am I doing this, what am I trying to achieve, what am I trying to heal, how will I know when I've healed or achieved the objective so I know when enough is enough. And if you don't have the discipline to take what you learn from the medicines, see, the medicines will show you where you're out of balance, but they won't do the work to balance you. So the medicine ceremony is only the beginning of the process. It's like if you come to me because you're having challenges in your business and I'm a business expert and I say, okay, here's 5 reasons why you're having these problems. I'll prioritize them number 1 to 5. And I say, this will straighten your business out. But you go home and you just keep doing the same shit. You've got no reason to come back to me and complain because you're the problem, right? So when people are doing plant medicines or any of these other things, if they don't have a sense of why am I doing this and how does it make meaning in my life and how am I using this to somehow advance my creativity, look deeper into myself, heal my relationships, develop more spiritual awakening, etc., then it's just sugar, drugs, and alcohol and pot and mushrooms for everybody. And what you get is a bunch of stoned people that don't know what the fuck they're doing. And here we all are.
Is part of it, because what you're saying absolutely makes sense. There's a purpose, and I suppose there's a purpose for doing it. And also, if you have a purpose, that's what keeps you balanced. For me, even when I was younger, one of the things that kind of kept me on the rails was I was really into my weightlifting and bodybuilding. And so whatever happened, it was like somehow I've got to get to the gym.
Yeah.
And that was some kind of compass. It wasn't a lot, but it was a little bit that kind of kept me going.
Well, it's also when you go to the gym, you have a measuring stick.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
You drink too much alcohol, your deadlift goes down. You drink too much alcohol and it takes a lot longer to recover and warm up. You have a measuring stick. See, most people have let go of all their measuring sticks. That's the problem.
But also when I used to come out, the other thing is the mindset after coming out for whatever. I always remember this day so clearly. And I, just walking out at the end of a dark day, this mindset change as a result of going in the gym.
Yes.
It's like, okay, suddenly whatever's happened there has been a transformative experience in some ways. So that I guess, with workouts, with fitness, it seems to change the your mental chemistry in some way as well.
Of course it does. I mean, I've got numerous books in my library on the physiological and hormonal changes that happen through fitness. You get endorphin release, you breathe better, you ramp up your detoxification systems, you oxygenate your body. The body is a bioelectrical system, so whenever you're moving your body, you're stretching fascia, which produces piezoelectric current, which your glands and organs use to digest, metabolize, assimilate, and eliminate. It feeds your brain. I mean, the list of things that exercise does that are positive are so much that if people used exercise before drugs, the whole world would change. But only 3% of women and 8% of men worldwide do any regular exercise, including walking a dog. So I often say to my students, here you are in San Diego, you go out on a Sunday, you see pelotons of bicycle riders, you see people playing tennis, and you see the golf courses with a bunch of people. But what you don't realize, in a city of 3 million people, that's everybody. Right? So you saw 1,000 people exercising, but there's 3 million people here. The rest of them are at home eating Twinkies and watching junk television and playing video games. So my point is, very few people in the world actually understand the benefits of exercise, because their idea of exercise is getting up from the breakfast table, going to their car, driving to work, sitting at a computer, walking to the lunchroom, eating junk, going back to their computer, walking to their car, going home, and then medicating themselves for a life with no meaning and being in a factory existence. And so they have to use sugar, drugs, alcohol to escape the reality that they've bought into, because they haven't taken responsibility for creating the life that they want, which is why in my system, being clear on what your dream is number one. Because if you don't have that compass bearing, you're very susceptible to manipulation by anybody.
And is any of that, with psychedelics or whatever, is any of that meant to be for slight enjoyment, entertainment, or is that part of where it becomes dangerous if it's, yes, I get how it can support your main purpose, but if it becomes more like, okay, well, I'm actually enjoying that, are you supposed to, or are you not supposed to? Is it supposed to be like going to the gym?
Well, I think that you can do it that way, but that's also a very elusive relationship, because what happens, first of all, psychedelics are very powerful. And like anything, 1 cup of coffee becomes 2, becomes 3, becomes a pot, and then you're burned out. 1 glass of wine becomes 2, becomes 3, and then you're addicted. So if you don't keep powerful medicines like that in a sacred container, then what can happen is you start, I've been microdosing LSD or mushrooms for 6 months, right? And now what happens is you don't know who you are without them, right? So you start becoming codependent on this sense of opening instead of doing what I said earlier, let the medicine teach you how to be open. Let the medicine teach you, for example, how many people would be better off singing, dancing, rattling, drumming, and playing than doing psychedelics, because then they would actually be doing something that shows them that they can create an altered state anytime they want to, with no dangerous side effects and no codependency on a drug. So, like, I get burned out business executives or people going through a midlife crisis, and there's a time where I will recommend microdosing certain plant medicines, because it helps them get past the confines of the stressful lifestyle and belief system that they've trapped themselves in, so that they can actually start to feel joy. They can see color. They can feel vibration. They can hear the music. They actually start realizing there's a lot more to the world than they realized. But you see, the danger is that if we start relying on external agents to make us happy, we forget how to create joy and happiness. So the question I say in this regard is, and you'll appreciate this, what if I said to you, Matthew, give your daughter a gram of mushrooms every day and she'll be happy? What would your first thought be?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'd probably freak out a little bit. Yeah, there's no
But
need.
where does that lead?
Yeah.
That leads to you having to have stock in a very large mushroom farm.
Well, yeah.
And it leads to the desacramentalization of a spiritual tool given to us by nature to help us heal, grow, and become more centered in our own autonomy. So if the use of any drug or medicine decreases your autonomy and your self-agency and your ability to create the life you want and live it, it now is a threat to your sovereignty, your autonomy, and your freedom. Mm-hmm. The problem is most human beings are still psychologically children. Research shows in psychology that 90% of the people in the world have not developed past the psychological development of a 12-year-old. And Ken Wilber is one of the people that provides that research. So you see a lot of people walking around in adult bodies doing advanced jobs, from flying airplanes to running businesses, but on the inside, they really only have the psychological development of a 12-year-old, and all you got to do is say, well, Paul, I don't believe that. I'll say, okay, good. Look at how they manage food, sex, money, drugs, and their own life. And are they making adult contributions to society? And are they living lives that, if emulated by their children, ultimately give those children freedom and the skills to navigate the world? Well, all you got to do is turn on the television and see the news hour, and there it is. Look at the statistics of disease. Look at the rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide. It's through the roof. Why? Because people keep depending on social media and government and medicines and doctors to take the problems away that they're creating by not having an adult relationship with themselves in their own life.
So in some cases, like if you do choose to experiment with things like that, it sounds like there's got to be some personal or emotional growth to be able to actually. It's like sort of jumping in a sports car, like driving a regular car and jumping in a high-powered sports car and feeling you're not going to probably kill yourself. Like there's got to be some training that gets you ready to even probably do that, unless you want to risk killing yourself.
Well, yeah, or disabling yourself.
Right,
I think one of the key factors that people have a hard time with is it's about being honest with yourself. Most people just bullshit themselves indefinitely. I did a series of videos on YouTube called The Fastest Way to Health. And step number 1 is don't bullshit yourself. If you eat something and it gives you skin problems, makes your brain foggy, makes your gut bloat, gives you gas, and starts making you swell up and get fat, if you keep eating it, you're a fool. Running to a doctor to help you with that's not going to help, because they're going to give you a drug so you can keep doing that. They're not interested in actually identifying the problem, because that's bad for business. So you see, if we don't have a genuine interest in becoming an adult contributor to the world and growing ourselves, then ultimately what happens is what starts off as a stress reliever or something that's fun to do just becomes a habitual escape from the responsibility of learning how to create a life worth living. And, Socrates was the first one to say a long time ago, the unexamined life is not worth living. Because you just keep doing the same shit over and over again and blaming somebody else for the problem or expecting someone else to rescue you. And that leads nowhere.
No. It sounds like there's a definite, this sort of purpose or purpose in life seems as though it's a really important thing. And I that's the other thing that I seem to get a sense of, is a lot of people don't really have that. Maybe it's tied up in a job. It's like, okay, well, I'm not got purpose on my job or my life or my relationship, and not having that, or being in a bad job or a bad relationship or whatever, is going to sort of accentuate the need to go and do these things as an alternative. So is an important part to really work on finding what that purpose is or goal for you? And are there some ways that you've found that can help people start that journey of getting that reason for being here?
Yeah, that's the main thrust of my teachings at the core. That's why in my 1, 2, 3, 4 system, number 1 is, what is your dream, goal, or objective right now? As Jerry Wesh, the psychologist, says, if you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis. right?
I
So,
like that.
so, you see, your dream to create meaning and to add something valuable to the world through your exercise equipment, and to make it possible for people to keep themselves in shape in creative and new and useful and effective ways, gives you a compass bearing so you know when anything's pulling you off that dream, goal, or objective. But most people just go from crisis to crisis to crisis because they don't have a compass bearing. So they don't know when too much is too much or too little is too little. I always tell people, if you don't know what your dream is, then the first thing you should do is identify what your nightmare is and make that your dream. If you're financially strapped...
Make that your dream.
What's that?
Make your nightmare your dream.
Yeah, because then you have a reason to engage yourself in relieving stress and creating more freedom in your life, because most people's nightmare is where the grand majority of their life force energy and creative energy is trapped, right? So if you're in a job that you hate doing, but you've convinced yourself you have to do it to make money, then you come home at night and medicate the hell out of yourself so you can get into another reality that's not so stressful to be in, and deal with the fact that you have to go back to that shitty job again tomorrow and be controlled by some boss that drives you crazy, doing something that's monotonous and mundane and doesn't fulfill you and doesn't grow you. So if that's your nightmare, then look at all the things that you would really love to do. What I tell people is a very simple formula. They say, well, how do I figure out what it is that I want to do? And I say, well, I'll play a little mind game with you, and we'll do it together. I say, Matt, pretend that you just got arrested and put in a maximum security prison. And when you go into the prison, after they check all your orifices for drugs and shave your head and put you in a pair of coveralls and put a tattoo on your on your arm with a number, they take you up to the warden of the prison, and the prison says, Matthew, this is a unique prison. There's no other prison like this. This is a working prison. You're going to be in here for 35 years. You've got a life sentence. But in this prison, you have to choose a job and do it 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and be productive at it. But you can choose any job you want. I don't care if it's art, making surfboards, gardening, building fences, working on engines, building race cars. It doesn't matter as long as you're doing something productive. And I'm going to say to you, I'm the prison warden, Matthew, what would you like to do for 35 years? And if you're smart about it, you'll be spending your time in prison laughing, going, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing. I get to go to work every day to do what I love to do. And it's just like that Clint Eastwood movie. I don't remember the title of it, but at the end of the movie, he's in jail and he's out there gardening and he thinks this is the greatest thing ever, right? And there it is, right? So he ended up having to go to jail to finally have time to garden, right? So you see, a labor of love is sustainable because you're making love every day. But working for money is not sustainable because you can be doing what you hate to do. You're making money, but you're spending all that money on medicating yourself to get away from the pain that you've created by being a cog in a wheel. And a human being is a very creative creature. So the question is, Matthew, what do you want to do for the 35 years in my prison?
Well, it wouldn't be far off what I'm doing.
Well, that's a good sign.
To be honest, there'd be some, but I like making things. I love what I'm doing with fitness. So it would certainly, I'd spend a little bit more time thinking about it. But I wouldn't be doing something that you would say is totally different from how I spend a lot of my time.
So that would mean you found your legacy. It would mean that you're in tune with your soul. It would mean you're doing in the world what you came to do. Because when you're doing what you came to the world to do, there's a sense of passion and joy and love that comes out of you. I've done what I've done for almost 40 years because it's what I love to do. I love to help people. I love to understand. I've used my career as an excuse to learn more about myself. You see, when I have a patient come to me with some kind of weird problem, I have to look into it. And inevitably I find, I have some of that too, right? So now I'm learning about me, or I'm learning about what's possible to happen to me if I don't manage myself the way this person has. So the point is, I've been able to navigate real hard times, bankruptcies, attacks on me for, advancing the profession and many other things. But it didn't stop me because I was doing what I love to do. And so you have this flow of spirit that carries you through the challenges. But when you're not doing what you love to do, you don't have that core essence of spirit moving through you. So you're now running only on the physical systems of your body. You understand? When you watch somebody like Christina Aguilera dance and sing, and you're seeing soul move through that body. That's why someone like that can just make you cry and just make you have a sense of awe. You watch Michael Jackson sing and dance, and you see God singing and dancing, and you go, wow. But there's no way Michael Jackson would do that if you forced him to become a dentist or a mechanic. It wouldn't open his soul because it would be the wrong thing for him to do. It's up to each of us to spend enough time in an honest relationship with our own heart, with our own self. And it can take a while in life. I was fortunate. I figured out by the time I was 22 what I was here to do. I found that I got the most sense of gratification, love, and a sense of meaning when I was helping other people perform better, feel better. And that's what filled me up. That's when I knew this is what I'm here to do, and I never looked back. But prior to that, I was a father when I just turned 18 years of age. I'd worked in all sorts of different jobs, and I, would be working on fishing boats and then realize, God, this is hard work, it stinks, and it's not fulfilling to me. So I'd say, what do I want to do more than that? And I'd start looking. And then I might get a job as a mechanic, and that would work for a while. And all of a sudden I would start to feel, I can't do this for much longer. I'm dying inside. And that would take me to the next thing. Then all of a sudden you get to a point as you grow where you have all the pieces in line and you realize something wild and crazy, that every single job you did on the way gave you key skills and ways of relating that are integral pieces to the puzzle of what you came to the world to do. Then the floodgates open. For example, one of the most common things my patients have said to me in my career is, you're the only one that can explain things to me in a way that I can understand them. And I say, well, that's because I've done a lot of jobs in my life and I know how to explain things in different ways. If I'm working with an electrician, I can use electrical concepts to explain body problems. If I'm working with a plumber, I can use plumbing concepts. If I'm working with a farmer, I can talk about the body as a farm. You see my point? But my soul took me into all these other avenues, from racing cars to working on a farm to drill rigs to fishing boats to being a logger and many other things. And so when I became a professional therapist, it was easy for me to explain things to people in a way they could understand. And I realized if I hadn't have done all that stuff, I would never have been able to be a successful therapist because I wouldn't have the skills of communicating in ways that people can understand. Einstein said, you don't really understand something if you can't teach it to a 12-year-old. And that's true, right? So I think it's up to each of us to be honest about what it is that we can do in our life and in the world that gives us a sense of fulfillment that can carry us through the natural challenges of growth and development. Because we're all growing. We're growing psychologically, we're growing spiritually, we're growing in our understanding of the management of money, we're growing in our understanding of the management of ourselves and relationships, we're learning how to manage our sex drive. We're learning how to manage our need for attention from other people to validate ourselves. We're learning how to manage power. We're learning the importance of not sabotaging people. We're learning the importance of not prostituting ourselves. We're learning that we shouldn't victimize ourselves or other people. I mean, human life is very complex.
And ever changing.
and ever changing. So you see, if you don't have a heartfelt interest in your own growth and something that will carry you through the process, then your growth gets stunted and you end up needing doctors and drugs to medicate you. And that becomes that's what I call a non-generative spiral. You drill down. A generative spiral is when you use your life experiences, as painful and challenging as they be, to grow, right?
And with one of the things, I guess, even if when you have got your passion though, like you, I guess, without knowing the future and only being able to look back, and it's easier, I guess, the older you are, you can look back and say, oh, I can see how those were all connected. A lot of times you're just looking into the abyss and you don't know what's happening. So how do you, when you feel, it's a great question to ask yourself, I think, and I'm going to use that, but when you sort of feel you might have it right, but then things come up like, financial is the biggest one. You might think that this is what you've got, but then you get hit with a number of things like you have lawsuits and then financial problems and then you lose it all. How do you continue to say, well, I'm going to stay on that. I'm not going to drift off and go and medicate because I'm lost again. How do you stay, how do you keep that purpose when you're going through this total unknown where almost like all the external signals seem to be saying, look, you're not on the right path?
Well, you see, if you've already got a sense of heartfelt direction, then it's not a question of the path. It's a question of, am I going to let the challenges and obstacles in life break me down and limit me? Or am I going to mature to see challenges as opportunities to learn more? Mm-hmm. I went through a bankruptcy because I trusted an accountant that told me that I needed to go bankrupt. But 2 years later, I went from being broke to making $2.5 million a year. About 2.5 years later, I could have paid everybody off. And I wouldn't have had that 7-year thing hanging over my head. But I didn't know enough about the depth of business or my own earning potential to filter that advice. So what going through the bankruptcy did for me was let me know I'm strong enough to build myself back up from ground zero. I took the challenge and I created an opportunity out of it. And the opportunity I learned was don't hire cheap business managers. Spend the money on really good help because you're not saving money by hiring cheap employees. And don't take a first opinion at face value and believe it. Get a second or a third opinion and find somebody else that's been through what you've been through and navigate it successfully and ask them how they did it. So you see, if you take obstacles as limitations, that's a limiting approach. But if you take challenges as growth opportunities, because quite frankly, my experience of my own challenges, the ego always wants to blame somebody else. But I'm the one that hired the cheap business manager. I'm the one that listened to the accountant. So when you get mature enough to sit with yourself and say, I must fully accept my responsibility for the choices that led to this problem, and therefore, I must be wise enough to make the changes to minimize the risk of it happening again, then that's a commitment to your life path. That's a commitment to your own growth. Mm. That's legitimate personal, professional, and spiritual growth. Yeah. That's taking an adult approach to life. Mm-hmm. But if it's just somebody else's fault and you're victimizing yourself, you're still in the child archetype and you're always going to be on the hind tit hoping for someone else to rescue you or burying yourself in drugs or making excuses and how's that done for the world so far, right? Bob Proctor says, successful people are successful because they're willing to do what other people are not willing to do. And that's true. Successful people are successful because they're willing to do what other people are not willing to do. I think we're all created equal. We all have genius in us. We're all breathing the same air. We're all on the same earth. We all get warmed by the same sun. We're all built with the same 400 pairs of muscles and 123 bones. You see my point? We're all actually structurally more the same than we are different. It's our mindset and our belief systems that make the big differences, right?
You talk, one of the videos I was listening to yesterday was you were talking about language and the language that you use for yourself and how to change that language.
Yeah.
Is this where you would sort of have that, where you would meditate, or is there a place where you could, like you say with the pulse, getting connected with how your heart beat? Is there a place and a time where you can actually get connected to your own voice to yourself? Because that example about, I'll use yours, the decision on the account and taking the wrong decision. I suppose if that was someone that worked for you, you could probably sit in front of them and do a bit of a review and say, okay, look, what happened here? And you could ask them a few questions and, well, what would you do differently next time, etc.
Yeah.
You'd have this conversation. But do you have these conversations with yourself, assuming that you are coaching yourself, you are that person that made the error? Do you do things like that? And have you found that there's a good place where you can get that clarity and sort of figure some of these things out, as opposed to being in this constant, as you said, spaghetti mess of things where you can't see the wood for the trees?
Yeah. Well, I developed a technique that I teach in my holistic lifestyle coaching program to help people learn to manage their mind. And the first thing you got to do is have a dream, even if it's a dream for the situation. So let's say you're having challenges with your wife and you're fighting a lot. And it's causing a lot of internal dialogue and stress inside of you. And you're thinking, oh, she's a bitch, I'm going to leave her. And, how am I going to deal with that with my kids? And so you're in this inner turmoil. So the first thing I do is say, look, if you get caught in all that, it'll just drill you down into a negative place and you'll start making decisions you'll regret later. So the first thing I do is say, well, what is your dream for your relationship with your wife? And most people say, well, to get along and to enjoy life together, something like that. Okay, good. So the thought, my wife drives me crazy and she's a real bitch, is that a positive or a negative? Well, it's a negative. So that's the tail side of the coin. Now, if a negative exists, by definition, the positive potential must also exist. So my wife is not a bitch, and my wife doesn't drive me crazy. I'm just not paying attention to what her genuine wants, feelings, and needs are, and maybe not expressing mine in a way that she can hear them. So the point is you take the challenge, then you state your dream. My wife's a bitch, she drives me crazy. My dream, we get along. The negative. If you keep reinforcing that, it'll start reverberating in you, and then your neural network supports it, and that becomes your reality because you create it. But if you say, my wife's a bitch and she drives me crazy, flips over to, my wife's not a bitch, she loves me, but we're just having a hard time finding harmony together, and there's ways that we can work on it if it's family and marriage counseling or me learning how to communicate more effectively, whatever it might be. Then what happens is you choose the option that is dream affirmative, and you put emotion into it. I choose to have a better relationship with my wife. I choose to do the work to better understand her. I choose to try to help her understand me better. And if you energize that and you reinforce that every time the negative thought comes up, state your dream, look at the negative, flip it over, create an honest positive that you're willing to participate in, then you start building a neural network that supports that. So then what starts to happen is every time your wife starts irritating you, pissing you off, and getting you angry, instead of reacting and making it worse, you start thinking, honey, what is it that you're really wanting, needing, or feeling right now? Because I'm having a hard time staying connected to you. I'm feeling attacked or judged. Is there a way we can stay connected to the heart and try to meet each other halfway here? So because you're developing a new neural network that is actually supportive of your dream, instead of falling into the negative bias and seeing what you don't want all the time, which is classic human behavior, then you actually start orienting yourself toward possibility, not limitation. So it doesn't matter what it is, health problems, relationship problems, money problems, self-esteem problems. The thing about a brain is it believes anything. right? If you tell yourself that you're God enough times, you'll believe it. If you tell yourself that nobody loves you, you'll believe it. And whatever you believe becomes your reality, and every cell in your body believes it, right? You can talk yourself right into a disease. You can talk yourself into an illness, and you can talk yourself into being successful, happy, healthy, and whole. That's a fact. And that's why mental self-management is such an important part of my teachings, because, you know, like I said to you earlier, a mind makes a far better tool than a master. And if you don't learn to manage your mind, you're going to get beat up.
It's ironic that we talk about this, you know, a lot of the people that probably come through your workshops and a lot of people that are out there helping people to get better. From when you listen to your explanation of health, mind, body, how it's all connected, it seems as though it would be generally a profession for older, wiser, very well educated, almost like what you would see as a doctor, you know, like the ideal, if you had to sort of imagine a picture of somebody that did the things that you're talking to, it probably wouldn't be what you see in a lot of cases in traditional fitness areas. And it just kind of makes me sort of wonder, you know, maybe those people are out there, but it seems as though the fitness space, certainly that we operate in, there could be a slightly different vision for it, where you would have these people that are probably correctly paid for what they do, correctly able to like if you get align people on some of the stuff you're doing, it would totally transform their life. They wouldn't just sort of lose a little bit of weight. It would make such a big difference in their life. But for whatever reason, it seems as though we're still, in general, struggling to get people beyond where they are at the moment, which is looking at the people in the fitness industry and fitness professionals as someone that will help them lose a little bit of weight, and they kind of yo-yo in and out of different diets and different fads. And I wondered, you know, what do you think would help to maybe, I know this is a huge question, but as a dream, you know, what do you think it would help to sort of shift this sort of gimmicky perception of what people have from the fitness industry into something that could be a genuine alternative to you know, medicine and all these other things that are out there? Because
the answer is simple: education.
Right.
Remember in our podcast we did together, we talked about the fact that what used to be conferences for health and fitness educators is now just a bunch of equipment and manufacturers and supplement providers controlling the whole thing, and bringing in people only to convince everybody that you can do everything with a Reebok core board or some stepper or some magic pill. So what's happened, and they used to pay experts like me to come in, now you've got to pay to be there. So the whole education arena for health and fitness providers has gone exactly the same way government. We don't have a government, we have a corporate headquarters. We don't have freedom, we have corporations telling us what we must do with our bodies, what we must eat, not eat. And so what you have now is not learning how to think, but being taught what you must think in order to be in our profession or to be a doctor. And so you've got all these guidelines that you must meet, many of which go completely against honesty and the Hippocratic Oath and doing what's best for yourself or other people, which is dangerous. So it all begins with education. Right? And the reason I've been able to really impact even just the exercise industry is because I educated people. And when I'm teaching them so obvious, it hits them over the head. They go, oh my God, it's so obvious. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, years and years ago when I released my Flatten Your Abs Forever presentations, I started teaching them in conferences all over. It would blow people's mind because they'd sit through a 2-hour lecture where I never showed them a single exercise, but I showed them 25 other things that would stop you from flattening your abs forever. And so they walk out of there with their heads just completely going, oh my God, I had no idea. No wonder my 1,000,000 crunches a week's not doing a damn thing for me, right? I'm the strongest fat person in town. It all boils down to education. And one of the things you said earlier is important too. You know, even though a lot of people that come into an education system like mine are young and they're being taught mature adult concepts, people that gravitate towards my teachings are often aware that the things that they've tried haven't worked. And the reason they're coming is because they've read my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, or applied information in my YouTube videos, or taken an online course or attended workshops with me, done something and had it transform their life. I mean, I've got hundreds of letters from all over the world from people who parents got their kids and themselves off medical drugs and got healthy just from following my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. Cancer's disappearing. I mean, crazy stuff that just makes me full of joy because it makes all the challenges of my life worth it, right? So the point I'm making is that the people that come to me have usually already hit the bottom, found that something I taught really worked, and realized if a little bit works, then a lot more would probably do a lot better. And the other thing is that just because somebody's young doesn't mean that their soul is young, right? Certainly you've met children that are very wise.
Yeah,
Like-
and when I say that, I am generalizing, and you know, it was more explaining. Okay, you come out of school, instead of going and working in a supermarket, you become a personal trainer, and that's, you know, a first step, as opposed to it being a career where you go and study for many years and you become a doctor. You know, that's a slightly different approach. But
Yeah.
But I go on, carry on. I agree with what you're saying.
Well, I think one of the big problems, as I mentioned earlier, a physical therapist or a chiropractor has to do usually 4 years of schooling, but we don't have a personal training profession. We've got something where you can, you know, do as little as idea and pass 75 multiple choice questions on a internet test, and now all of a sudden you're a personal trainer, but
Yeah,
you really
you can do
haven't
it.
got a damn clue what you're doing.
Yeah, I think I think
not
you can do it in a few. There's some very short, very inexpensive, like, you know, $500 or $600 and an online course, and you can become a, you know, level 3 PT. I'm not sure exactly that amount, but I know there's some very quick, you know, do this and you're able to go out there and, you know, hit clients.
Yes. And so you see, what we don't have a real exercise profession, and we don't have an exercise vocation. And you can't have a real exercise profession or vocation that is absent of an understanding of nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement, because those are all the factors that either support your ability to recover from exercise and manage stress. And if you don't have a science for knowing how to determine how much physiological load there is in different systems of the body, you have no way to know whether your exercise dose is therapeutic or destructive. You understand? Like, the greatest athlete in the world that's lacking sleep is at risk. The greatest athlete in the world eating junk food is putting themselves at risk of shortening their career. So because all stresses in the body summate, they add together, your total stress response is mental, emotional, physical, biochemical combined, right? You can't walk into the gym and leave your divorce at the front door, leave your bank account at the front door, and leave your sex life at the front door. All of it goes to the platform with you. All of it's holding the dumbbell with you. But here we have a bunch of people that design exercise programs based on the illusion that none of those things matter, or they're completely ignorant of how they influence a person, right? And you've been lifting weights long enough to know that if you're under a lot of stress or having a relationship challenge or a serious business challenge, weights get heavy. You go into the gym and everything feels heavy. And you know it's not your weightlifting, it's that you're being drained emotionally or mentally, or you're in pain inside. And because of that is a real drain on your vitality, your life force energy, you can't put the same into an external activity when you have an internal entanglement that needs to be dealt with. And if you try, you'll get hurt. I've seen it happen a million times. So the point is that we've got to go from, you know, putting some shit on a shingle and calling yourself an exercise professional to deciding whether or not we want to make this a vocation and use the knowledge and the science that we have as to what a human being really is, which means you're going to have an integrated, holistic approach, or you're always going to be at risk of injuring people with exercise in the name of trying to help them.
And I thought that would also go towards the thing we spoke about earlier, you know, like, what's the purpose? Is, you know, are you there to help people do, you know, do some squats and bench press and that, or are you, you know, is your purpose really to make an impact on all the areas of someone's life? And, you know, certainly for me, probably the later one would seem to have a lot more depth and meaning and purpose, and also if financial is your goal, you know, that as well.
Yeah. The other thing is, one of the challenges is to be a legitimate exercise or fitness professional, taking everything I've just shared in that regard. It's a much deeper venture for the individual because you can't teach what you don't have. You can't give what you don't have. My students are tasked first and foremost to apply the teachings in their own life. Otherwise, you just become a cut and paste expert and you never have any real confidence in yourself, and people sense your own insecurity at an unconscious level. You know, this is why you can have people in a gym that sound really cool and they've got lots of degrees, but somehow they never have a good business. But some guy over there that's not near as smart as them, but really loves what they're doing, is really in themselves and really passionate, has this huge business. And Smarty Pants over here is going, that idiot over there has a lot more clients than me. Why is that? The point I'm making is that to really be good at anything, we first have to be good at it in ourselves. So that means you have to learn about managing your diet. You have to learn about your own inner hygiene. You got to learn to work with your own mind. You have to learn to recognize how important sleep is and have sleep hygiene and be honest with yourself. You have to learn how to sense when you're getting out of balance and be responsible enough to put yourself back into balance. Or what happens is you just tell people to do stuff that you're not willing to do. And because you're actually educating the client, there always comes a time when the client or the patient or the student of the trainer or the therapist knows enough to begin to analyze you. So what it looks like is this, and this has happened to lots of my students, and I always warn them it's going to happen. I say, if you are eating gluten and you're all swollen and puffy and you got gas and you got skin problems, and you're sitting there telling your client that these are the symptoms of gluten intolerance, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, or 5, or 10 visits. And they're going to look at you and say, you know, I've noticed you have all these problems. How long have you been eating gluten and why do you still do it? And that's the death stroke. Because now you have to face your own game and your own insecurities. So what you see is professionals will leave that part out of their approach because they don't want the insecurities and the risk of being called out. So I challenge all my students to eat, sleep, breathe, and shit their teachings so that when you go to work, you don't have to memorize anything. You don't have to be an intellectual genius and have a head like a Rolodex. You just show people how you do it every day.
Exactly.
You say, this is what a poop looks like. This is what it should smell like. This is what your pee should be like. This is how you proportion your meals. This is how you pay attention to when you got too much fat, too much plant foods, or too much animal foods in your diet. You show them what you do on a daily basis, and then you have this ease and comfort. And if you run into a challenge, you say, oh, that's a great one. I'm going to have to do some research on that. And you go look into it. But it doesn't mean that you're not practicing. It means you're now exploring with the person. And since you're the professional, you're probably the one that should be able to understand the science behind it and dig deeper into it and make a sense of meaning out of it. And this is where the magic comes, because you start doing research to help other people and you learn more about yourself and you go, holy shit, now I know why I've had this problem. Or, you know, how I can use this. Or now I know 6 other people that have this problem that I didn't even realize was there. So when you embody what you teach, then every client actually opens the doorway to a deeper penetration, not only into your coaching abilities and your skill as a therapist, but into yourself. And to me, that's just the magic of this profession. Like, it's a never-ending learning curve. There is no way you can get bored unless there's something wrong with you, unless you're doing the wrong thing. Like, I've never gotten bored. If you go sit out there and look at my chair where I sit every morning and do my studies, there's at least 150 books piled up there. Those are all the books.
There's God knows how many behind this.
Well, yes, and I've read thousands of them. But those are the books that I'm trying to get to because I know there's something in them that I need to help somebody else or help myself. What I'm saying is, after 39 years, I'm as passionate today about learning and growing as I was when I was 22. Why? Because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Knowledge is horizontal. No matter how fast you run, the horizon keeps moving away. So some would say, oh my God, I'll never know enough. And I'll say, that's fantastic, because it means you're on a legitimate journey. And that makes it exciting and interesting, because the day you think you know where you're going for sure, you stop paying attention, you stop asking questions, and you stop growing.
So it leads me on to my final question, because we could talk all day. Unfortunately, we've got some stones to lift.
Yes,
well, not unfortunately. Fortunately, we have. But how do you think, like you're 10 or 12 years older than me now, different stage of life. How do you continue to have this, I guess you've obviously got this purpose, you've got this drive to keep learning and developing and creating. How do you look at, what's your sort of timeline, and do you look beyond, I suppose, like when you're coming to, do you look beyond a measurement of what your life is and how long it is, and is that purpose, I suppose, beyond this reality of the world, and is that what sort of keeps you going, because there's something outside of the, Paul CHEK that's likely to live a certain amount of time on this earth, and there's a greater thing driving you? Or how do you think about yourself and your purpose that gives you that energy when you're sort of as you sort of get on in life and age in life? And I suppose it's a question I didn't think of until I'm now in my 50s and 60s, and it's like, well, you're obviously, you've got a different perspective on life. There's probably a certain amount of life that you've lived and a certain amount you've got going, and I'm just curious how you think about that, and in terms of what you're going to be doing for the next chapter.
Well, I'm in the next chapter now.
How do you define that next chapter then?
Well, I just followed my heart, and I kept asking the question, what's the most important thing I can do to help people? And so as I've evolved, my realization of what was the most important has expanded. I've gotten deeper and deeper into recognizing what it is. So, like I was saying to you earlier, I don't get excited at all. I mean, if the greatest athlete in the world called me on the phone right now and offered to pay me $10,000 an hour to deal with their back or their neck or their knee or whatever problem they were having, I would probably say, no, I'm too busy writing a book. If they offered me $100,000 an hour, I'd probably say, well, you're getting close to sidetrack me for a week or so. But what I'm saying is that I feel that it is my responsibility to the rest of myself. You see, I'm deep enough into my spiritual development that I don't see Matthew as somebody independent from me. I see Matthew as an expression of the same source of creation, whether you want to call it God or the universe, that I am. So in other words, I don't see you as separate from me. I see you and I as expressions, just like all trees are expressions of forest, and they're expressions of the earth and the sun. So I'm far more concerned about the forest than I am any one of the trees. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So what my podcast gave me the ability to do is reach 50,000 people sitting at my desk, sharing the smartest, wisest people I could find and sharing the best of my wisdom. And I used to have to travel a long ways to a lot of conference halls to get 50,000 people in front of me to give a message that I can now give on my podcast. So for me to get sidetracked working one-on-one with people's problems, which I've been through 1,000 times, I've seen the same things over and over and over again. My innate calling is I've got to, especially at the state that the world's in, I've got to share my wisdom as wide and far as possible to give as many people an opportunity as I can give to gain the knowledge, the insight, and the wisdom to enhance their lives, because I can't help heal the collective if I'm working in too narrow of a focus. That's why I'm writing my whole new book series. That's why I'm building my new Spirit Gym website, which is a mentorship program where I teach people how to apply the spiritual growth and development techniques that are in my new book series, because then I can actually begin to plant seeds of legitimate conscious growth and development, legitimate self-mastery, legitimate awareness of the importance of becoming an adult and contributing to the world, and have a ripple effect so that, you see, I need to know when I die, I did the best I could do to leave the world a little better than how I found it. And so when I listen to my soul's guidance, my soul tells me this is what it's important for you to do now. And I've got children, and the state of the world is deeply concerning to me as a parent, right? I've got a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I've got a 43-year-old with a grandchild. So I've got a grandchild, and my sons and his partner have 3 other boys. And you've got kids, and anybody that I know with kids, all my friends that have kids, we're all concerned. Like, you know, most native societies thought 7 generations in advance. Before they destroyed shit, they thought, how will this impact the next 7 generations? Because they knew that for their tribes to survive and thrive, they had to think ahead of the impact. We're not doing that at all. We're not even thinking about tomorrow, right? So I am deeply concerned that whatever I do, I make the best effort I can to not only help wake people up to their own creative abilities and their own adult responsibilities and their own opportunity to make their life one of meaning and fulfillment, and to learn to handle challenges as opportunities, but I think we're all dangerously ignorant of the fact that what we're creating in the world right now is extremely devastating. Not only, there's not going to be 7 more generations. It is not going to happen. I am deeply concerned about my children's life. I mean, when I look at what I've seen change in my 60 years of life, there was no fax machines when I was a kid. There was no cell phones. I mean, and many other things. There was no computers. I've watched all this, and I've watched how it's helped and how it's caused tremendous destruction. But each human being today processes more information every 24 hours than a person born in 1900 did in their entire lifetime. And most of that information is bullshit. Yes. It's dangerous, distracting, and it's full of lies, manipulation, twisting people's minds, and greed. How do we get our kids ready to do that? How do we teach them what the truth is or isn't? How do we teach them what's meaningful? How do we teach them to avoid pedophiles? How do we teach them how to deal with the strange sex books and the transgender movement and the transhumanism? How do we get them to not rushing to put computer chips in their head? How do we get them to really love being human and knowing what it takes to keep their kids' future safe? If I'm not focusing on those things, then all I'm doing is helping people get over their gas and put on a little bit of muscle. And I've got tunnel vision. But as I've grown and matured, my vision has expanded and expanded to where I actually see that we have fallen into a very dangerous trap, largely by being brainwashed from our earliest education in churches and education systems to not learn how to think for ourselves and not have a sense of logic and rationality. And we've lost touch with the foundation principles that life is built on. And so the answer to your question is, for me, it's about what can I do with my life skill and my knowledge and the wisdom I've accumulated that's most likely to address the most important problems in the world in the ways that I have the most skill and ability to do, right? I'm not a chemist, I'm not a rocket scientist, and I don't build iPhones. But I do know a lot about the human condition, I do know a lot about health, and I do know a lot about psychology. I do know a lot about holistic sciences, and those are the things that ultimately teach you how to use all the things that I don't know enough about. I mean, I have a phone just like everybody else. The difference is I don't let it control my life. So I think, in a nutshell, for me, I've reached the point where I have to ask myself every day, not how can I make the most money, because I could make a lot of money doing a lot of things that wouldn't help the world. How can I die knowing that I did my very best to support the next 7 generations and wake enough people up to the task that we've got to share, because we all live here. We all eat food. We all have soil to take care of. We all have water to take care of. We all have a sky to clean up. We all have to get past racial differences, sexual differences, and we all have to realize that we all carry a piece of the puzzle that makes each other's life special. You make beautiful exercise equipment so that guys like me can use it and teach people how to use it. My chef is an amazing woman, and she's a great chef, and she makes my life a lot better, and I don't want to be a chef. So if I'm spending all that time cooking, I'm not doing what I came here to do. So she brings me her genius, and I share with her the things that can help her do what she loves to do. If we realize that we're all carrying gifts to each other, instead of trying to segregate and isolate and criticize, if we say, look, we love going to Chinese restaurants, Japanese restaurants, Jamaican restaurants, Mexican restaurants. We love music from around the world. We love watching movies with actors of different races and colors and nuances. When you look at the diversity and how it actually supports our growth, development, and understanding of each other, I think people have forgotten to look at that. And so what happens is we keep getting pushed into all this isolation and segregation because it creates stress, because it goes against human nature, and it makes us highly profitable and easy to control. And that can only happen because people aren't smart enough to think for themselves, and so they're gullible, and they're children with a big daddy on their computer or on the television or wearing a white jacket. And, guess what? We're in an initiation, and the initiation we're in is that of adulthood. We either grow up and start taking responsibility for ourselves and stop putting money in the hands of people that are destroying our children's future and the planet, or we die with the people that are destroying our lives and the planet. It's that simple. So I'm going to die anyhow. I might as well give it my best shot. That's where I'm at.
Great answer. And it was difficult for me to put that question together, but I think you've given me a great answer to what I was looking to hear. So thank you very much, Paul.
My pleasure.
Appreciate
always.
your time again. It's been wonderful. So
thank you, bud.
Thanks.
I always enjoy our conversations because I know you're really listening.
Yeah. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.